You're kneeling in sand. Your knees sting. The metal shackle around your throat is so snug you can hardly swallow. The chain links you to 11 other women. You can hear them inhaling, some weeping, one chanting in a tongue you don't understand. A man's silhouette eclipses the sun. Brief respite from the heat. Then hands seize your chin, force your mouth wide. Fingers push against your teeth, your gums, the back of your mouth. You retch. He doesn't pause. He inspects your tongue for illness, checks your eyes, pulls down your lip as if you're livestock at auction. Because that's precisely what you are now. 12 days ago, you were the child of a village leader in the Sahel. 12 days ago, you had a mother who called your name each morning. She's gone now. You witnessed it, and you continued walking because the men with blades made it clear. Stop moving. Join her. In Arabic, there's a term for what you've become, Jariya. It signifies slave girl. But that rendering is too neat, too gentle. It conceals what the word truly means. What it truly means is, your body is property now. Your destiny is whatever a purchaser chooses to do with it. Your history is erased. The man appraising you steps back, gestures to another man holding a leather sack. Coins are exchanged. You've just been traded for the 3rd time this month. And the destination they're bringing you, scholars would spend centuries trying to deny it ever existed. This is the Arab slave trade. 14 million Africans. Hayata, 300 years. A system so proficient at eliminating human beings that almost no descendants remain to recount the tale. If this past matters to you, drop a like and subscribe. Roman weird history doesn't shy away from the stories the world tried to conceal. You know of the Atlantic slave trade, vessels, shackles, plantations in America. 12 million Africans shipped across the sea over 400 years. That past has exhibitions, memorials, films. Kids learn about it in school. Leaders deliver speeches about it. But there was another slave trade, older, longer, and by some accounts, even greater. The Arab slave trade started in the 7th century, soon after the rise of Islam and the Arab expansions that swept across North Africa. It didn't stop until the 20th century. Saudi Arabia formally ended slavery in 1962, Mauritania in 1981. These aren't dates from distant history. These are years your grandparents recall. There are individuals alive now who were born into societies where this commerce still legally persisted. Between 650 AD and 1900 AD, somewhere between 14 and 17 million Africans were seized from their dwellings and sent to the Middle East, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. Some scholars suggest the real figure is even larger because records were erratic and countless fatalities went unrecorded. More people over a longer span, through routes that crossed 3 continents. Yet almost no one mentions it. Why? Because this slave trade was structured to leave no evidence. And it worked. In America today, there are 45 million people of African ancestry, living testament to what transpired. Their presence keeps the memory intact. Their fight for justice ensures the story is never lost. In the Middle East, after 1,300 years of importing millions of Africans, almost nothing. Small enclaves in Yemen, dispersed groups in southern Iraq, a few thousand Afro-Arabs in Morocco, tiny remnants where there should be millions. Where did 14 million people vanish? The answer is the bleakest part of this account. The men were mutilated. This is not conjecture. This is recorded across hundreds of original sources spanning many centuries. Arab slave traffickers routinely mutilated African males at rates between 80 and 90%. The operation was performed at certain points along the trade paths. Egyptian monasteries gained infamy for it. Coptic Christian monks devised methods that marginally increased chances of survival. Marginally. For each man who endured castration, anywhere from 3 to 5 perished due to blood loss, infection, or trauma. Some accounts indicate even greater fatality. Consider that calculation. If a merchant required 100 living eunuchs to offer at market, he might begin with 400 or 500 males. The remainder died shrieking in the sand. The finances were harsh but rational. Castrated captives couldn't procreate, couldn't establish families, couldn't build communities strong enough to resist, couldn't leave heirs who might eventually demand liberation. They toiled, they aged, they perished, and they were substituted with new prisoners from the next raid. Generation after generation for 1,300 years. But the women fulfilled a distinct role altogether. They were kept whole, kept fertile, kept specifically for what their bodies could yield. And what befell them is a narrative that historical records convey only in subtle euphemisms, in silences between lines, in particulars that chroniclers of the era deemed too improper to detail openly. The engine demanded endless sustenance. Arab traders weren't marauders themselves. They were entrepreneurs, managing elaborate commercial systems that crossed continents. They didn't assault settlements directly. Rather, they established economic structures that motivated Africans to capture and exchange each other. Firearms poured into the region. European guns exchanged through Arab intermediaries. Fabrics, luxury items, salt, which was valuable in sub-Saharan zones. And in return for these wares, human lives. The kingdom of Dahomey, in what is now Benin, emerged as one of the primary sources. The kingdom's economy became reliant on yearly slave raids against neighboring groups. The Sultanate of Zanzibar governed the East African trading paths. The Funj Sultanate of Sudan controlled the Nile Passage. Various Tuareg factions managed trans-Saharan routes. African realms waged war on their neighbors not for land, but for human cargo. Captured survivors were marched to gathering points and sold to Arab merchants. The cycle perpetuated itself endlessly. More firearms led to more victorious raids. More raids led to more prisoners. More prisoners led to more buying power. More buying power led to more weapons. A machine that thrived on human agony and grew mightier with every soul it devoured. Villages were ambushed at sunrise when opposition was weakest. Fighters encircled communities while people slumbered. The onslaught was immediate and overpowering. Men who resisted were slain on the spot. Men who yielded were assessed instantly. Age, vitality, strength. Young, robust men were set aside for castration and sale. Elderly men, with no commercial value, were often killed where they stood. But the women encountered entirely different calculations. Dealers inspected them with particular standards in mind. Age was crucial. Girls too young would need years of feeding before they became productive. Women too old were less valuable. The ideal bracket was approximately 13 to 25 years old. Old enough to endure the harsh journey ahead, young enough for years of exploitation. Physical looks influenced price significantly. Arab markets had explicit tastes that veteran traders knew thoroughly. Certain physiques, particular features. Distinct markets sought specific traits. Ethiopian women fetched the highest prices in nearly all markets. Their appearance was regarded as especially attractive. They could sell for double or triple what women from other places brought. Women who fit the sought-after standards were separated at once. They'd get slightly improved treatment during transit. Not out of kindness, never out of kindness. Damaged goods fetched lower prices. Safeguarding the investment was simply practical. The division of families occurred at abduction sites or collection points. Mothers ripped from children, husbands from wives, sisters from brothers. The ties of a lifetime were cut apart in seconds, with no chance of meeting again. European travelers and missionaries who saw these moments later wrote about scenes of deep heartbreak. The crying, the frantic holding on, as families tried to stay together for just a few more seconds. The last touch before chains were tightened, and people who had loved each other their whole lives were pulled apart, never to reunite, never to learn what became of one another. One missionary wrote that the sounds stayed in his dreams for years, that he could still hear mothers calling for their children long afterward. No matter how far he went or how much time passed, those cries followed him. Those voices echoed across Africa for 1,300 years, and almost no one beyond the region heard them. Then came the Sahara. The trans-Saharan routes were journeys counted not in distance, but in death. Imagine the space from New York to Denver. Now imagine walking it in chains with almost no water under a deadly sun. From gathering points in sub-Saharan Africa to major markets in North Africa, Tripoli, Tunis, Cairo, Marrakesh. Caravans travel distances longer than 7,500 miles. Some paths stretched over 2,000 miles. The trip lasted 2 to 3 months at best. Conditions were never ideal. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth. Daytime heat often rose above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The sand grew so hot it burned bare skin. Shade was missing for hundreds of miles. Then night arrived, and temperatures dropped sharply. The same desert that roasted travelers by day could freeze them after dark. The constant change alone ended countless lives. Water mattered more than anything else and was shared with cold calculation. Camels needed water to live. Camels were costly. Camels carried goods. Enslaved people were cheaper than camels. They were seen as replaceable, so they received only what water remained after animals drank. Lips split and bled. Mouths swelled. Minds struggled with the truth that there was nothing to drink and endless sand still ahead. Food was scarce. Dried dates, sometimes meat, just enough energy to keep moving, never enough to stay strong over months of walking. Death rates were terrible. Historians believe 20 to 30% died crossing the Sahara. Some caravans lost half the people they carried. Others arrived missing more than 60%. Those who collapsed were left behind. Stopping slowed the group. Helping the weak risked losing the rest. The system left no room for kindness. People were abandoned alive, too weak to continue, left sitting in the sand as the caravan moved on, waiting for the end. So the routes became lined with remains. Heinrich Barth, a German explorer crossing the Sahara in the 1850s, recorded what he saw. The road was covered with human skeletons. In some valleys, Bones were so common that walking without stepping on them was nearly impossible. Skulls white from the sun, ribs half buried in drifting sand. These were not ancient bones, they were recent, added to paths that had gathered bodies for more than 1,000 years. René Caillé reported similar scenes on western routes. He described valleys that looked white from afar, not from sand, but from piled bones. Gustave Nachtigall wrote of areas where skulls and bones made the ground feel almost paved. Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions, over 13 centuries. Their remains scattered across the world's largest desert, marking the paths that consumed them. Silent proof of a trade the world chose not to see. For the women who survived, who somehow endured the heat, the cold, the thirst, and the hunger, reaching a North African port only meant that the immediate danger of dying had ended. But staying alive came with a heavy price. Many arrived changed in ways no one could easily see. Their bodies survived the journey, but their inner strength had been deeply hurt. Their suffering was not finished. It was simply turning into something new. The slave markets of the Arab world were old systems shaped over centuries into places of frightening order and speed. By the time European visitors began writing about it, Cairo's market had been running for more than 1,000 years. Over generations, traders perfected their methods, their prices, and their ways of judging people. Buyers came from across the Islamic world and beyond. Ottoman nobles from Constantinople, Persian merchants from Isfahan, wealthy Arabs from Damascus and Baghdad, traders from the Gulf looking for household workers, and even Europeans, despite official bans, found secret ways to take part. The markets were divided by type. Manual workers stood in one area, skilled workers in another, household servants in a third, and behind curtains, in the most private sections, were women reserved for special buyers. The inspection process followed clear steps. Teeth were checked first, since they showed age and health. Skilled buyers believed they could guess how long someone might survive just by looking at teeth. Then skin was examined for illness, marks, or injuries. Hair was checked for quality and length, followed by the rest of the body. Those paying high prices demanded careful inspection. These checks were personal and invasive, done with the same cold distance used when judging animals for sale. European travelers wrote accounts so upsetting that many publishers removed parts before printing them. One British visitor in the 1830s wrote that women were made to walk and turn in ways unsuitable for polite conversation. He said buyers studied them with the same lack of emotion used when examining horses. Prices changed depending on background, looks, and purpose. Most women sold for lower amounts. Those considered more desirable sold for much higher prices. Very young women from favored regions could sell for the value of several years of income. The highest prices were paid in private by agents working for powerful families. Zanzibar became the largest slave market in the Indian Ocean region. At height, around 50,000 people passed through each year. The island's economy depended almost entirely on this trade. David Livingstone saw it himself. What he witnessed deeply affected him and helped push British efforts to end slavery. He wrote that it was impossible to exaggerate the horror, and that the scenes were so terrible he tried to erase them from his mind. The market stayed open until 1873, when British pressure forced its closure. A treaty was signed. Public auctions stopped, but the trade continued secretly for many years. Ships traveled by night, Deals were made in hidden places. Demand remained strong and profits were high. So where did these women go after being sold? That depended on who bought them and why. The richest buyers were creating harems. Ottoman rulers kept harems with hundreds, sometimes thousands of women. The imperial harem at Topkapi Palace in Constantinople held as many as 2,000 women at different times. Lesser nobles and local governors kept smaller groups based on their wealth. Even fairly successful merchants might own several women for household and personal reasons. The harem was more complex than the modern meaning of the word. It was not only about desire, it was also a place of power and rivalry. Women competed for attention because having a son with a powerful man could change everything. The mother of a future ruler could gain enormous influence. So women planned, made friendships, and worked against rivals. Poison was often used. Quiet power struggles, just as clever as those in royal courts, happened behind closed walls. For a captured African woman, entering a harem meant the careful removal of everything she once was. She was given a new name. Her language was banned. Her beliefs were changed. Her past was erased and rebuilt. Teachers showed her new rules, manners, expectations, how to move, how to serve, what was allowed, and what brought punishment. Over time, nothing of her former self remained. The person her family loved disappeared, replaced by someone shaped to obey her owners. Some women managed this world skillfully. A very small number gained real influence. Kösem Sultan controlled Ottoman politics for many years. She began life as a slave taken from a small Greek village. Hürrem Sultan became the lawful wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, something almost unheard of for a former slave. But these cases were so rare that history remembers them only because they were unusual. For every Kösem, thousands lived and died unnamed, used until they were no longer needed, then cast aside. Women sold to less wealthy owners faced different lives. Many became household servants with added duties. They cooked, cleaned, cared for children, and were expected to obey their owner at all times. There was no choice, no right to refuse. Islamic law did offer limited protections for enslaved women who became mothers. A woman who gave birth to her owner's child was called an walad, meaning mother of a child. She could no longer be sold. Her child was legally free. When her owner died, she was meant to gain freedom. But these rules depended on enforcement. In real life, they were uneven and only applied after pregnancy. Before that, she was considered property. Children from these unions were legally free and often accepted. Some rose to importance. Several sultans were born to enslaved mothers, yet the mothers themselves remained enslaved unless clearly released. Any closeness involved was forced, never chosen. Over generations, these children married into Arab families. Their features blended. Their African roots faded with each generation until they could no longer be seen, until they were gone entirely. This was the final erasing, not only of people, but of their descendants. Not just of lives, but of any proof they had ever existed. The final erasing, until no trace remained. If you are still listening, stay with me. This story is not finished. The Arab slave trade did not end with a single bold moment. There was no great announcement, no war fought to stop it, no day when the world stood up and declared it over. Instead, it slowly weakened, pushed by outside pressure rather than inner change. British naval forces began shutting down East African routes in the late 1800s. Ships were hunted at sea. European colonial governments blocked trans-Saharan trade as Africa was divided. International pressure led to official bans during the 20th century. But the legacy is not statues or memorials. The legacy is what is missing. In the Middle East today, there are almost no visible descendants of the 14 million taken there. The men were unable to have families. The women's children blended into surrounding populations. Their history thinned until it disappeared. The victims vanished so completely that most people never learned they existed. No movies tell their stories. No holidays remember their suffering. No leaders speak their names. In 2020, archaeologists in Libya uncovered a mass grave holding hundreds of remains. Tests showed they were sub-Saharan Africans who died in the 18th or 19th century, almost certainly enslaved people who never finished the journey, who collapsed and were left behind as caravans moved on. They were never recorded. They had no names. No children left to remember them. No one, anywhere in the world, who knew they had ever lived. No marked graves, no monuments. No one left to cry for them. Only bones scattered in the desert. Quiet proof of a tragedy the world chose to ignore. The Atlantic slave trade left 45 million descendants who make sure it is never forgotten. The Arab slave trade left silence. Nothing but silence. 14 million people erased so completely that even their names are lost. Think of the woman in the market, the one whose teeth were checked, whose body was judged, whose humanity was slowly taken away piece by piece. We will never know what she was called before her name was stolen. The name her mother gave her, the name her village used. She might have been sent to a harem in Cairo, competing with many other women for brief notice from a man who owned her. She might have lived in a home in Baghdad, cooking, cleaning, and obeying whenever she was summoned. She might have ended up in a palace in Istanbul, forgotten in a quiet corner when her youth passed. She might have had children who never learned her first language, who never heard her songs, who never knew her stories or where she came from. She might have died in the desert, her bones added to millions more, lining the routes that history tried to erase. What we do know is this: she existed. She suffered. She survived things no human being should ever face. And for nearly 1,300 years, millions like her were used by a system built to erase them completely. The Atlantic slave trade has monuments, museums, and days of remembrance. This history has sand, covering bones that will never be named. Remember her not as a number, not as a statistic. Remember her as someone's child, someone who once laughed, someone who had a name before it was taken away. That is the only memorial these 14 million will ever have. This is Roman weird history. We do not soften history. We show what truly happened. If this story mattered to you, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't, and tell me in the comments which forgotten history we should uncover next.